Long before Gandalf walked the lands of Middle-earth, long before the shaping of Arda itself, there existed a realm beyond time and beyond the physical world, a place known as the Timeless Halls. It was here, in the dwelling place of Eru Ilúvatar, that the Ainur were brought into being. Among them were the powerful Valar, and the more numerous, but lesser in might, Maiar. And from among these Maia spirits, one was named Olórin. Olórin was not a warrior, nor did he seek glory or dominion. His spirit was gentle, curious, and wise. While other Maiar aligned themselves early with the great Valar, who focused on the building of the world, those like Alle, the smith, or Tulkas, the champion Olórin lingered in thought and reflection. He wandered the timeless halls, learning through observation and empathy, seeking not power, but understanding. In the vastness of the timeless halls, and later in Valinor, the Undying Lands, Olórin came to dwell among the Valar, the greater beings who shaped the world at the direction of Ilúvatar. It was among these powerful spirits that he found his deepest source of wisdom, Nienna, the Lady of Mercy. Unlike many of the other Valar, Nienna was not concerned with creation or war, but with sorrow and healing. Her halls lay on the westernmost borders of Valinor, open to the winds and sea. She wept for the sorrows of the world, even before they came to pass, and from her tears came a deep and abiding compassion. Olórin sat often with Nienna. He listened as she mourned for what was and what would be. And through her, he came to understand a great truth, that pity and empathy could be sources of strength, and that to comfort others in despair was to shine a light in the deepest darkness. Nienna taught him that true wisdom came not from knowledge alone, but from the ability to see the world through the hearts of others. This teaching would remain with him for all of time. He also walked in the gardens of Irmo, called Lórien, the master of dreams and visions. There he learned of hope and imagination, of how dreams can inspire and renew. From both Nienna and Irmo, Olórin came to understand the inner lives of elves and men, their fears and desires, their courage and weakness. He did not simply study them, he felt with them. Unlike some of the Maia who were eager to take shape and exert their will in the world, Olórin was humble. He was not counted among the greatest in might, nor did he ever seek such esteem. Yet he became great in a different way, in wisdom, in spirit, and in compassion. He walked unseen among the elves in the early days of Arda, moving quietly and unnoticed. It is said that he loved them deeply, and they, in turn, loved him, though they did not always know his name. He whispered to them in their hearts, bringing courage to the fearful, hope to the weary, and patience to the rash. In the tongue of the elves, he was known as Olórin, which means dreamer or visionary, a name that speaks to his deep inner life and his connection to unseen truths. Olórin's humility set him apart even among the Maia. He did not seek to rule, to craft, or to dominate. While others aligned with the more active Valar like Aule, who made the dwarves, or Orome, who rode out to hunt the monsters of the dark, Olórin chose paths of contemplation and healing. He aligned his spirit not with flame and hammer, but with sorrow and solace. This made him a mystery to many, even to some of the Valar. But it also made him one of the wisest of the Maia, for he had seen both the light and the shadow in the hearts of others, and he had chosen not to turn away. His wisdom was not academic, nor was it rooted in lore alone. It was the kind of wisdom that comes from presence, from being with others in their darkest moments and offering a hand, a word, or simply a silent companion. This depth of spirit would make Olórin uniquely suited to the task that would one day await him in Middle-earth. For though he was a Maia, and therefore mighty in his own right, it was his humility, his empathy, and his ability to inspire others that would make him the ideal messenger of hope in an age of growing darkness. He was there during the First Age, though few knew it. He walked among the elves, unseen and unnamed, a silent counselor in times of grief. He likely witnessed the destruction wrought by Morgoth, the fallen Vala, and mourned the countless lives lost in the great wars of Beleriand. He saw the rise and fall of heroes, the burning of cities, the breaking of oaths, and in all of this he learned, not in a scholarly way, but in the way one learns by walking beside those who suffer and choosing to stay. Even as Melian, another Maia, took on a physical form and became Queen of Doriath, Olórin remained unseen. He resisted the temptation to shape fate or to take dominion over peoples and kingdoms. He trusted that his work was best done quietly, gently planting seeds of courage in the hearts of those who might one day make great choices. By the Second Age, as Sauron, the chief lieutenant of Morgoth, began to rise in power, the Valar watched from afar. They did not intervene directly in the affairs of Middle-earth, but they did not ignore the growing threat either. As the Third Age dawned and Sauron's return became a certainty, a new plan was formed: to send emissaries to Middle-earth, not as conquerors, but as guides, not to dominate, but to inspire. When the Istari, the order of wizards, were chosen, Olórin was among those selected, but even then, he hesitated. It is said in the writings of the Valar that Olórin did not wish to go, for he feared Sauron, not in a cowardly way, but in a profound and respectful awareness of the Shadow's power. He understood that evil did not always come with horns and fire. It often came softly, through lies, through pride, through domination masked as benevolence. But it was precisely because of this humility, this fear that was born from wisdom, that Manwë, the king of the Valar, insisted he go. Manwë, who saw deepest into the hearts of all the Ainur, understood that Olórin's gentleness was not weakness, but strength refined by compassion. Nienna too supported this decision, for she knew that Middle-earth would need a light that did not blind, but warmed, a fire that comforted, not consumed. And so Olórin departed the Blessed Realm, sailing from the shores of Aman in the form of an old man, bent, gray, and humble. He left behind the timeless halls and the purity of Valinor, entering a world full of pain, doubt, and fear. He came not in splendor or with hosts of angels, but clothed in flesh, bound by time and weakness, as all men are. This was the cost of his mission, that he, who once walked freely as a spirit, would now taste the weariness of mortality. Yet in that weakness there was a purpose. He would not defeat Sauron through might of arms or through raw magical power. He would defeat him by kindling resistance in the hearts of elves, dwarves, and men, by making them believe they could stand, and that standing they could prevail. He would not carry the burden of the world himself. He would teach others how to bear it. This was Olórin's greatest gift, the ability to inspire hope even in the face of despair. The seeds of this gift had been planted long ago, in the halls of Nienna, watered by tears and nourished by sorrow. They had blossomed in the quiet gardens of Lórien, under the watchful gaze of Irmo, and they would now bear fruit in the fires of Middle-earth. In becoming Gandalf the Grey, Olórin would take on a new name and form, but the spirit beneath remained unchanged, a Maia of wisdom and compassion, forged not by power, but by love. A servant of the secret fire, wielder of a flame that kindled hearts rather than destroyed them. In a world threatened by the shadow of tyranny, Olórin would become a beacon of resistance, not through domination, but through guidance. His story did not begin in the Shire, nor with the Fellowship, nor even in the White City of Gondor. It began in the quiet halls of mourning, in the lightless places of sorrow where true wisdom is born. It began as Olórin, a humble spirit who walked among the mighty and learned to serve the weak. That is the true beginning of Gandalf, not as a wizard, but as a silent comforter, a dreamer, a friend, not as a figure of authority, but as one who leads through listening and who triumphs not through force, but through love. By the dawn of the Third Age of Middle-earth, the scars left by the War of the Last Alliance had faded into history. Sauron had been defeated, his body destroyed at the hands of Elendil and Gil-galad, and his spirit driven into hiding. But he had not been utterly vanquished. As time passed, whispers of his return began to circulate once more, especially in the dark corners of the world. The shadow was regathering its strength, and the Valar, the angelic powers who watched from afar, knew the battle was not over. Evil was patient, and Sauron had not expended all his cunning or will. The free peoples of Middle-earth would need help, not in the form of armies or conquest, but in wisdom, counsel, and hope. And so, the Valar convened. The halls of Valinor, untouched by mortal decay or time, were stirred with concern. The question was not if aid should be sent, but how. Direct intervention, as had happened in the days of the War of Wrath, was no longer their way. The First Age had ended in cataclysm when the Valar moved against Morgoth with all their might. That war had reshaped the very lands of the world, but now the path forward would require something gentler. The peoples of Middle-earth needed to resist evil by their own strength, but they also needed guidance mentors who could awaken their courage, unite their scattered strength, and help them see the long shadow for what it truly was. Thus was born the mission of the Istari, the Order of Wizards. The term wizard is somewhat misleading when applied to the Istari. They were not merely magicians or wise old men with staffs and spells. They were Maia spirits divine, immortal beings lesser than the Valar but still ancient and powerful. Each of the Istari had once dwelt in the timeless halls before the making of the world. They had witnessed the music of the Ainur and taken part in the shaping of Arda itself. And now they would bind themselves to flesh, to time, to weariness and uncertainty, all for the sake of aiding those who might never know their names. Around the year 1000 of the Third Age, the Valar chose 5 Maia to undertake this task. Their charge was clear, and yet profoundly difficult. They were to go to Middle-earth in the form of men appearing old, even frail, and assist in the resistance against Sauron. But they were forbidden to dominate, to rule, or to match the Dark Lord in open combat. They were not to seize thrones, raise armies, or display their full might. Instead, their strength was to be in persuasion, wisdom, and quiet influence. Their power lay not in control, but in counsel. In this way, they would walk among elves, dwarves, and men as equals, or rather, as humble servants, without revealing the full majesty of their origins. Of the 5 Istari who came, the most renowned in later days would be Mithrandir, known to the elves as the Grey Pilgrim, and to the hobbits and men of the West as Gandalf. But he was not the first to arrive. The first was Kurumo, a Maia of great knowledge and skill, aligned with Aule the Smith. To him had been given great power and the leadership of the Order of Wizards. In Middle-earth, he would be known as Sauron the White. Sauron came in majesty and with high purpose. He was proud even in Valinor, but wise and gifted. The Valar trusted that he would lead the Istari wisely, guiding the free peoples toward resistance and unity. He bore the white robes of leadership, a sign of his status among the 5. Next came Alatar and Palando, the Blue Wizards. They were sent into the east and south, far beyond the knowledge of most in the west. Their task was perhaps the most uncertain: to hinder Sauron's influence among distant lands, to spread seeds of resistance in places otherwise lost to darkness. Some believe they failed, or vanished into obscurity. Others, including Tolkien himself in his later writings, speculated that they may have succeeded more than anyone realized, perhaps stalling the Dark Lord's rise by centuries through unseen efforts. Whatever the truth, their stories are shrouded in mystery. Then came Eowendil, a Maia of gentler nature, who had been closely aligned with Yavanna, the Vala of growing things. He took the name Radagast and was sent with a love for all beasts and birds, for the wild and untamed lands of Middle-earth. Though he was not meant to be a champion in the war against Sauron, his knowledge of nature and his communion with animals made him a unique figure, one who might hear the first stirrings of the enemy's return through the whisper of wings and the cry of the forest. Lastly came Olórin, the Maia of dreams, wisdom, and compassion, who had long been the most reluctant to take part in the mission. As Gandalf, he came not in splendor, but cloaked in humility. He was chosen not for his power, but for his ability to awaken the best in others. Unlike Saruman, who sought to command, Gandalf would inspire. He would walk the hard paths, never building a fortress or gathering followers to himself, but instead planting courage in the hearts of the small and overlooked. Together, the 5 Istari arrived upon the western shores of Middle-earth, disembarking at the Grey Havens, welcomed by Círdan the shipwright. It was Círdan, ancient and wise, who saw through the appearances of the wizards and perceived their true natures. Though Saruman wore white and Gandalf gray, Círdan discerned that Gandalf had a deeper strength, one not of might, but of purpose. And so, in a moment of quiet foresight, Círdan gave Gandalf the Ring of Fire Narya, one of the 3 elven rings. It was a ring meant not to dominate, but to inspire. It gave heart to the weary and kindled courage in the hopeless. In secret, Gandalf bore it from that day forward, using it not to rule, but to light a fire of resistance in the hearts of those he met. The Istari scattered, Saruman made his seat in Isengard, a place of stone and thought, once a watchtower of Gondor. There, he studied lore and the arts of the enemy, seeking knowledge that could be turned against Sauron. But over time, that study became obsession, and that obsession led to pride. Saruman would fall, turning from his mission to seek mastery, believing that he alone could wield the tools of the enemy against him. He saw the ring as a prize, and power as a means to enforce order. Radagast wandered into the wilds, becoming more attuned to the animals and forests than to the affairs of elves and men. His heart was pure, but his focus drifted from the central struggle. He did not fall to evil, but he became ineffectual, a benign presence, isolated and largely forgotten. The Blue Wizards, Alatar and Palando, vanished eastward. The details of their fates remain elusive, and many in the West knew nothing of their work or legacy. Perhaps they failed, or perhaps they succeeded in ways that cannot be measured by the victories of the West. But Gandalf remained true. He traveled the roads of Middle-earth without a home or tower. He befriended the free peoples, learned their languages, and earned their trust. He became a familiar figure, sometimes welcome, sometimes feared, but always respected. He counseled kings and guided wanderers, investigated shadows and rallied heroes. All the while, he bore his mission in silence, never boasting of his origins, never seeking a crown or a throne. He was a servant of the light, not its master. The Istari had been sent to guide, not to rule, and that subtle distinction was both their greatest challenge and the source of their undoing. For those like Saruman, the temptation to use power in the name of good was too strong. For those like Radagast, the call of the natural world drowned out the greater war. Only Gandalf seemed to walk the line with clarity, leading without dominating, urging others to rise rather than elevating himself. Their story is a profound meditation on the nature of authority and the moral weight of intervention. The Valar, in their wisdom, understood that to defeat evil through sheer power was to risk becoming like that which they opposed. Instead, they trusted in the strength of the free peoples, in their ability to choose the right path when given the chance. The wizards were not sent to save Middle-earth, but to help its people save themselves. And yet, even that limited mission proved too much for most of the Istari. Only one would see it through to the end. Only one would cast aside glory and embrace humility. Only one would die and return, transformed not by his power, but by his unwavering service to a cause greater than himself. That one was Olórin, the last and most humble of the 5. As Gandalf the Grey, and later Gandalf the White, he fulfilled the mission the Valar had set so long ago, to stand against the shadow not with domination, but with hope, to light a fire in others that would not be extinguished, even in the darkest hour. The story of the Istari is not just about magic or mystery. It is about the dangers of pride, the power of humility, and the belief that even the smallest voice, when lifted in courage, can shape the fate of the world. When Olórin, the Maia spirit, shaped by compassion, wisdom, and humility, accepted the charge of the Valar to travel to Middle-earth, he did so with reluctance, not because he feared the enemy, nor out of disdain for the peoples he was meant to help, but because he understood the weight of the task ahead. He foresaw how perilous it would be to assume flesh, to walk among the peoples of Middle-earth as a limited being constrained by form, vulnerability, and the ever-present temptation to exert dominance rather than offer guidance. Of all the Istari, he was the last to accept the mission. Yet in that hesitation lay the essence of his strength. Unlike the others, who stepped eagerly into their roles, Saruman, with pride, Radagast with innocence, the blue wizards with quiet resolve. Olórin knew that the subtleties of evil could not be met with power alone. True resistance would require wisdom, empathy, and sacrifice. And so, when he took up the name Gandalf, meaning elf of the wand in the tongues of men, he did not fashion himself as a lord or a conqueror. He came instead as a wanderer, cloaked not in brilliant robes, but in gray. Gray was not the color of kings or priests. It was not the color of dominance or sanctity. It was the color of travelers, of middle ground, of the in-between. Gandalf the Grey embodied this balance. He was a bridge between worlds Maia and mortal, lorekeeper and swordsman, friend of elves and companion of hobbits. He was a figure who could walk in both the halls of power and the quiet roads of the Shire without seeming out of place. In wearing gray, he declared himself no master, no ruler, no claimant of thrones. He came not to shine, but to serve. His staff was his companion, not a scepter. His words were his weapons. Unlike Sauron, who coveted knowledge to build influence, Gandalf pursued learning as a form of service. He wandered not to impose ideas, but to understand. He listened, observed, questioned. He delved into forgotten archives, explored shadowed ruins, and learned the tongues and tales of every people he met. His knowledge was vast, not because he hoarded it, but because he honored those who carried it before him. To the elves, he was Mithrandir, the Grey Pilgrim. Among the dwarves, he earned respect not just through wisdom, but for his rare willingness to understand their ways and honor their traditions. Among men, he was both counselor and irritant, respected in Gondor, feared by some rulers like Denethor, but never dismissed. And to the hobbits, he was simply Gandalf, an old man with fireworks and riddles who knew far more than he ever let on. But behind that humility was immense strength, tempered and rarely shown. Gandalf was capable of great feats. He could command fire, shatter stone, and see through lies and illusions. Yet he did not flaunt these powers. He never ruled a city, never claimed land, never asked to be obeyed. He taught by example, by walking alongside others, by kindling courage in the hearts of those who had long forgotten it. The Shire, in particular, became central to Gandalf's long labor in Middle-earth. Many others, even wise leaders like Elrond, might have overlooked the hobbits as provincial and unimportant. But Gandalf saw what others did not. He recognized in hobbits a unique strength, a quiet resilience, an innocence untainted by the great evils of the world, and a capacity for loyalty and bravery unmatched by larger folk. He did not seek to protect them as pets, nor to lead them as subjects. Instead, he cultivated them, encouraged them, trusted them. It was this trust that led him to Bilbo, and later to Frodo. It was this insight that made him the architect of Sauron's undoing, not through armies or magic, but through the hands of a humble ring-bearer. Throughout the Third Age, Gandalf traveled relentlessly. He had no tower, no keep, no fixed dwelling. While Saruman cloistered himself in Orthanc and amassed knowledge like a fortress, Gandalf gathered relationships, threads of trust and understanding spun across every corner of Middle-earth. He became a friend to the elves of Rivendell and Lothlorien, a counselor to the stewards of Gondor, a watchful eye in Rohan, and even a guest in the depths of Erebor. In every place he went, he looked not to command, but to strengthen. He did not rally nations by force, but by conviction. And when he uncovered signs of the enemy's return, whispers of darkness rising in the east, the corruption of Greenwood into Mirkwood, and the strange presence of a dark sorcerer in Dol Guldur, he pursued the truth tirelessly. He investigated not because it was his duty alone, but because he believed that knowledge and courage shared freely could prevent disaster. Gandalf also understood failure. He knew that Sauron could not be simply destroyed by force, and he understood, more than most, the danger of becoming what one opposes. He saw in Saruman's choices a mirror of the very pride that had long ago doomed Morgoth, the belief that one could use evil's tools without being corrupted by them. Gandalf rejected this utterly. He would not wield the One Ring. He would not contend with Sauron on the battlefield of domination. Instead, he placed his hope in the will of free peoples, in friendship, and in sacrifice. He also bore a secret flame quite literally. For Círdan the shipwright, upon Gandalf's arrival in Middle-earth, had seen his potential more clearly than any. Though Gandalf appeared as an old, grey wanderer, Círdan recognized the fire of purpose within him. He gave to Gandalf Narya, the Ring of Fire, one of the 3 elven rings of power. Narya was not a weapon, but an inspiration, a ring to stir hearts, to resist despair, to rekindle hope. With it, Gandalf kindled spirits, especially in times of darkness. It helped him fulfill his role not as a conqueror, but as a flame against the long, cold night of Sauron's dominion. In his long travels, Gandalf often chose the harder path, walking through forgotten places, seeking the aid of the overlooked. He did not raise armies, but built alliances. He did not bend others to his will, but showed them the wisdom of acting freely and with courage. This made him frustrating to some, inscrutable to others. But it also made him the only wizard to stay true to the original mission of the Istari. Gandalf the Grey was never about appearances. He was never about rank or title. Even when he sat among kings, he did not ask to be served. He did not issue commands, but suggestions. He did not promise victory, but offered the means to strive toward it. He did not claim to have all answers. He simply walked beside others until they found their own. His humility was not weakness, but the very core of his strength. He inspired through his steadfastness, his persistence, his belief in others. And when the time came for sacrifice, when the Fellowship of the Ring passed into the dark of Moria, it was Gandalf who stood alone against the Balrog, knowing that his death might be the only way to ensure their survival. That act, like so many others, was not about proving power. It was about service, about choosing others over oneself. Becoming Gandalf the Grey was not simply about putting on a robe and taking up a staff. It was the culmination of Olórin's deepest truths, his belief that true power lies not in domination, but in inspiration. That courage is not kindled by fear, but by compassion. That wisdom is found not in control, but in humility. The path of the Grey Pilgrim was not glorious. It was lonely, often thankless, and full of burden. But it was also the only path that could light the way for others. In choosing to be Gandalf the Grey, Olórin chose to be a servant, a guide, and ultimately a savior not through conquest, but through conviction. He did not seek to lead, but others followed. He did not seek fame, but he became legend. And when the story of the War of the Ring was finally written, it was clear. Without Gandalf, the free peoples would have scattered, fallen, or failed. Yet he never asked for thanks. His mission was never about himself. It was about lifting others, giving them the strength to stand, the will to fight, and the light to endure. In every way, becoming Gandalf the Grey was Olórin's true transformation, not into something lesser, but into something greater. Not into a ruler, but into a shepherd of hope. When the Valar resolved to send emissaries to Middle-earth to counter the growing shadow of Sauron, they did not send warriors. They sent 5 spirits of the Maiar, each chosen not for their power alone, but for their potential to inspire, to guide, and to assist the free peoples in their long struggle ahead. These beings would be known as the Istari, the wizards, and though they came from the same divine source, their paths would diverge dramatically in Middle-earth. The first to arrive was Curunir, whom men would come to know as Saruman the White. He was learned, proud, and persuasive, a master of lore, especially concerning the devices and arts of the enemy. Saruman's position as the White Wizard denoted leadership among the Istari, a status he embraced with great self-importance. He was gifted in speech, strategy, and the intricate workings of craft and mind. His arrival was met with respect, and for a time, he led the Istari with apparent wisdom. Next came Alatar and Palando, the Blue Wizards, about whom the tales are few and scattered. They journeyed far into the east and south, where the shadow of Sauron grew strong in hidden ways. Their mission was to stir resistance among distant peoples, to sow confusion in the ranks of the Dark Lord's followers, and to weaken the foundations of his empire long before his armies marched. What became of them remains uncertain. Some say they fell into obscurity, others suggest they founded secret orders that helped delay Sauron's rise. In either case, they passed from the known histories of the West. Radagast the Brown, or Awindil as he was once known, was a gentle soul, attuned not to the minds of men or elves, but to the natural world. He wandered among the trees, the birds, the beasts, a friend to all living things untouched by evil. Though he was sent to aid the free peoples, Radagast's heart lay with the creatures of Arda. He lost interest in the affairs of men and elves and grew increasingly solitary. Some considered him a failure in his mission, but Gandalf never judged him so harshly. Radagast may have turned from the road of politics and power, but he remained a being of kindness and peace, and in small forgotten ways, he served the cause nonetheless. Among these, Gandalf was the last to arrive and the most reluctant to come. Olórin had not volunteered for the task, believing himself too weak and humble to oppose Sauron. But Manwë, the king of the Valar, understood that this humility was precisely what made him worthy. And so Gandalf came, cloaked in gray, with no desire for command, only a heart prepared to walk among the people of Middle-earth and rekindle their hope. Though all the Istari shared a common origin, their relationships soon grew strained. Saruman, as the appointed head of the Order, regarded himself as the highest authority among them. He viewed Gandalf with suspicion, partly due to Gandalf's quiet influence among the free peoples, but more deeply because Gandalf possessed a quality that Saruman had lost: sincerity. Saruman had long prided himself on knowledge. He studied deeply the arts of Sauron, the making of the Rings of Power, and the workings of the mind and will. Yet, in his pursuit of understanding, he drifted toward envy. He began to resent Gandalf's ability to inspire others, his trust among elves and men, and especially the fact that Círdan had given Gandalf the elven ring of fire, Narya. To Saruman, it was an insult he, the White, had been passed over for the Grey. As Gandalf quietly moved across Middle-earth, uniting allies and uncovering dark secrets, Saruman withdrew to the Tower of Orthanc. There, he studied alone, growing ever more secretive. He watched the movements of Sauron with obsessive interest, and eventually, that gaze turned into something darker: fascination. Saruman became convinced that the only way to defeat Sauron was to master his methods. He reasoned that, to fight the Dark Lord, one must understand the logic of domination, of power, of control. But such reasoning was the first step on a long and treacherous path. Gandalf sensed this drift. He visited Saruman, asked questions, raised concerns, but Saruman deflected with arrogance, dismissing Gandalf as naive and meddlesome. To Saruman, Gandalf's wandering and friendships with hobbits and lesser folk seemed foolish distractions. He believed the time had come for action, for a more forceful hand to shape the world. In truth, Saruman had begun to believe that he could succeed where Sauron had failed, that he could wield the One Ring himself, not for evil, but for order. The rivalry grew. Saruman's words became more veiled, his intentions harder to discern. When the White Council was formed, a gathering of the wise to confront the growing shadow, Saruman was named its head. Elrond, Galadriel, Gandalf, and others joined this council. But it soon became clear that Saruman sought to control it, not guide it. He spoke endlessly, yet revealed little. He resisted calls to act decisively against Dol Guldur, where Gandalf suspected Sauron had returned. For years, Saruman delayed action, insisting that the enemy had not regained his strength. In truth, he feared that if others attacked Sauron too soon, he would lose the opportunity to find the ring for himself. Gandalf, for his part, remained watchful. He knew Saruman's pride would not be easily confronted. So he continued his own investigations into the history of the rings, into the movements of the enemy, into the lands of the hobbits, where he suspected the ring might one day resurface. He never trusted in domination. He trusted in small things, unexpected strengths, and hidden courage. The betrayal came slowly. Saruman began building armies in secret. He bred a new race of orcs, the Uruk-hai, stronger, fiercer, able to march by day. He raised fortifications around Isengard, bent the wild men of the hills to his will, and began to assert his influence over the Rohirrim, the people of Rohan. His voice, once a tool of reason, became a weapon of control. Even Theoden, king of Rohan, was ensnared by Saruman's subtle poisons. When Gandalf visited Isengard, seeking counsel, he found a trap instead. Saruman revealed the truth. He had abandoned the mission of the Istari. He no longer believed in aiding the Free Peoples, he believed only in power. He urged Gandalf to join him, to take the ring when it appeared, and to wield it for their own purposes. But Gandalf refused. And for that, Saruman imprisoned him atop the Tower of Orthanc. It was here that the rift became irrevocable. Saruman, once the leader of the Istari, had become a rival to Gandalf not simply in title, but in ideology. One sought control, the other, freedom. One sought dominion, the other, hope. Though Saruman's betrayal wounded Gandalf deeply, it also steeled his purpose. He escaped with the help of Gwaihir the Windlord and began to rally the Free Peoples for the storm that was coming. Even Radagast, distant from the affairs of men, unwittingly became a pawn in Saruman's schemes. Yet his trust in Gandalf proved valuable, for it was Radagast who sent Gwaihir to seek him, an act that led to Gandalf's rescue. In that moment, even the most reclusive of the Istari played a crucial role in the great unfolding drama. The Blue Wizards, their fate lost to legend, remain a mystery. Some say they failed. Others say they succeeded in unseen ways, delaying the rise of Sauron's allies in the east, buying precious time for the west. Whatever their destiny, they were absent from the final battles, their voices lost to history. But Gandalf remained. He alone of the 5 Istari fulfilled his charge. He did not seek power. He did not try to rule. He guided, encouraged, and gave hope even when hope seemed lost. When Saruman fell from grace, Gandalf rose, not through ambition, but through necessity. The title of the White came to him not by conquest, but by worthiness. The story of the wizards is a tale of contrasts, of pride versus humility, of control versus guidance, of betrayal versus sacrifice. In the end, Gandalf stood not because he was the most powerful, but because he was the most faithful to the mission. He understood that the battle against Sauron was not simply about defeating a Dark Lord, but about preserving freedom, courage, and the light that dwells even in the smallest of hearts. And so, while the others fell into silence, shadow, or solitude, Gandalf the Grey became Gandalf the White, not in imitation of Saruman, but as a restoration of what the White Wizard should have been. A beacon, a guide, a servant of hope. Long before the shadow of Mordor rose again in full, before the Fellowship was formed, before even Bilbo Baggins found a certain gold ring beneath the misty mountains, Gandalf had already begun his long and quiet work in Middle-earth. From the moment he arrived in the lands of men, elves, and dwarves, he walked the long roads not as a commander, but as a traveler, observing, learning, and gently shaping the course of events from behind the scenes. Though few knew it, Gandalf's presence influenced the destiny of Middle-earth far earlier and far more subtly than most would ever realize. After his arrival around the year 1000 of the Third Age, Gandalf's early steps led him into lands both great and forgotten. He visited Lindon in the far west, where the High Elves under Gil-galad still held memory of the Elder Days. There, he learned of the fading power of the elves and the sorrow that clung to their kind. He spoke often with Elrond of Rivendell and Galadriel of Lothlorien, absorbing the long histories of Arda and the lingering dangers that slept beneath the surface of the world. They, in turn, saw in Gandalf not only wisdom, but also foresight, a sense that this humble stranger was destined for greater things. It was Galadriel who first wished that Gandalf, and not Saruman, might lead the White Council. She saw in him the rarest blend of humility and strength. But Gandalf refused the position, content to serve rather than to rule. Instead, he turned his attention to the hidden places of Middle-earth, the distant woods, the lonely mountains, and the forgotten strongholds where rumors of old evils still lingered. He traveled far and wide, from the ruins of Fornost to the plains of Rohan, from the gray mountains to the darkening forest once known as Greenwood the Great. It was during these travels that Gandalf began to notice the signs of a gathering darkness. Though the shadow of Sauron had long been broken in the War of the Last Alliance, Gandalf sensed that something was stirring. The forest of Greenwood, once full of life and song, began to fall into shadow. Beasts grew twisted. Fear spread through the trees. And at its heart, a dark presence had taken root. A sorcerer known only as the Necromancer had claimed the fortress of Dol Guldur. Gandalf investigated this menace personally, braving the darkness of Dol Guldur in secrecy. There, he confirmed his fears. The Necromancer was no mere spirit, but Sauron himself returned in secret to rebuild his strength. It was this discovery that prompted Gandalf to urge the White Council into action. Though Saruman, ever cautious and already corrupted by his own agenda, resisted for many years. But even as he fought the rising darkness, Gandalf never lost sight of the small things, the humble folk, and the quiet corners of the world that others deemed unimportant. He became a frequent guest of Elrond in Rivendell, learning from the archives of Imladris and forging bonds with the elves who still watched over Middle-earth. In the east, he spoke with the rulers of Rohan and Gondor, planting seeds of friendship and trust that would later bear fruit in the time of war. Among the dwarves, Gandalf earned respect for his insight and his unexpected understanding of their ways. He visited Erebor and the Iron Hills, speaking with King Thrain and later King Thorin Oakenshield. It was Gandalf who first suspected that the fate of the Lonely Mountain might be key to resisting Sauron, for Smaug the dragon, nestled in his golden hoard, posed a terrible threat. If Sauron could ally with such a beast, or use the strategic mountain as a stronghold, the northern defenses of Middle-earth would crumble. And so, it was Gandalf who quietly began to weave the threads of a plan that would ultimately lead to the quest of Erebor, an adventure that seemed, at first glance, to be nothing more than a band of dwarves seeking lost treasure. But in truth, it was part of a greater strategy: to awaken the free peoples, to rally old alliances, and to neutralize a deadly threat before it could be used against them. It was in this effort that Gandalf found himself once again among the hobbits. His first encounters with the Shire were, by all accounts, unremarkable visits to a quiet land, meetings with curious folk, and shared meals by hearths and firelight. But Gandalf quickly realized that the hobbits were not as simple as they seemed. He saw in them a deep resilience, a strength of spirit masked by laughter and pipe smoke. He took great interest in their customs, their genealogies, their quiet bravery. Among them, Bilbo Baggins stood out, not because he sought adventure he did not, but because Gandalf saw in him a seed of something rare, potential. Convincing Bilbo to join Thorin's company was not an act of whimsy. Gandalf believed that the strength to resist the darkness of the world might not come from swords or crowns, but from hearts like Bilbo's, and he was right. Bilbo's journey to Erebor would result in the slaying of Smaug, the return of the dwarves to the mountain, and the discovery of the One Ring, though its true nature would remain hidden for decades to come. During these years, Gandalf became a unifier, not through command, but through presence. He brought news between distant realms, rekindled old friendships, and ensured that no people stood entirely alone. When Rohan faced threats from Dunlending raiders or internal strife, Gandalf appeared, offering advice or assistance. When Gondor's stewards grew wary, he reminded them of their duty. When the dwarves sought allies, he pointed the way, always watching, always listening, always one step ahead of the storm. He also cultivated relationships with beings, often overlooked: the Ents of Fangorn, the eagles of the Misty Mountains, the wild creatures that remembered the First Age. These were not allies that could be summoned like armies, but they were powers nonetheless, and Gandalf respected them. Gandalf's gift was his ability to move among all peoples without demanding allegiance. He could sit in the courts of kings, or walk unnoticed in the marketplaces of Bree. He could laugh with hobbits, speak in the ancient tongue of the elves, and listen to the slow thoughts of trees. Through this, he created a web of quiet alliances, a network of goodwill and trust that spanned all of Middle-earth. And it was this quiet work, unseen, uncelebrated, that preserved the unity of the free peoples long before the War of the Ring ever began. By the time Sauron openly declared himself in Mordor, the foundation that Gandalf had built was already in place. The elves of Rivendell and Lothlorien trusted him implicitly. The dwarves remembered his wisdom. The kings of Rohan and Gondor had heard his counsel. Even the hobbits, small and unassuming, knew his name. And when the ring finally came to light, it was Gandalf who understood its danger. While others might have hesitated, he acted. He confirmed its identity through fire and shadow. He warned Frodo. He called the council. He sparked the formation of the Fellowship. But none of this would have been possible without the groundwork laid in those early centuries, the quiet journeys, the hard conversations, the sleepless nights spent in ancient ruins and watchful travel. Gandalf had walked every path, met every people, and prepared the world not through war, but through wisdom. In the end, that was the essence of his influence. He was not a warrior. He was not a king. He wielded no armies and ruled no lands. Yet the fate of Middle-earth bent around his presence. Because Gandalf had done what no other wizard truly did. He loved Middle-earth. Not just its peoples, but its forests, its mountains, its languages, its stories. He loved it not as a domain to be managed, but as a home to be protected. Through that love, he became its greatest defender, not with power, but with purpose. Not with dominance, but with devotion. And long before the war began, Gandalf had already won the first battle. The battle to keep hope alive. The shadow over Middle-earth never truly vanished with the fall of Morgoth. It lingered in the corners of the world, in forgotten ruins and dark forests, in whispers and in the minds of those who longed for dominion. And in the south of the great forest of Greenwood, that shadow began to grow once again. Long before the events of the War of the Ring, Gandalf the Grey had taken it upon himself to travel the length and breadth of Middle-earth. As a servant of the Valar sent to guide the free peoples, he did not rule cities or command armies. Instead, he wandered, always watching, always listening. He knew that evil rarely announced itself in grandeur. It crept, slowly and silently, into the hearts of men and beasts, and it festered in the forgotten places of the world. It was during his journeys in the Third Age that Gandalf first heard rumors of a strange power stirring in the south of Greenwood the Great. The forest, once a place of beauty and life, had begun to change. Creatures that once roamed freely now kept to the northern glades. Beasts of unnatural strength were seen roaming in the south. Even the trees themselves seemed twisted, their boughs darker and more gnarled than before. Travelers who dared enter the region often vanished. The air grew thick with dread, and a name began to be whispered among the woodland folk, Dol Guldur. The name itself carried little meaning at first. To most, it was simply the designation of an old fortress ruin nestled in the southern hills of the forest. But Gandalf, wise and ever curious, was not content with dismissing mere whispers. He had walked these lands for centuries and recognized the signs of something deeper, something darker. The corruption of nature, the spreading of fear. These were not the acts of mere orcs or goblins. There was will behind this darkness, and it was growing stronger. In time, Gandalf sought out the truth for himself. He ventured into the darkening woods alone, cloaked in gray, silent and unseen. As he moved closer to Dol Guldur, he could feel the weight in the air, a pressure like thunder waiting to strike. There were no songs in this part of the forest. No birds called. No leaves rustled in the wind. All was still and watching. He approached the hill of Dol Guldur cautiously, hiding from sight and using all the craft and guile he had learned through countless ages. What he found there deeply disturbed him. The ancient fortress, once abandoned, was now alive with activity. Black-cloaked figures moved in and out of its halls, and strange shapes flitted through the night air. Most troubling of all was the feeling not of mere dread, but of something ancient and malevolent. Gandalf could sense a power dwelling at the heart of Dol Guldur, a presence so foul and overwhelming it seemed to smother the very light. At first, the being within Dol Guldur did not reveal itself openly. Instead, it sent out its servants, orcs, wargs, fell spirits, and twisted men corrupted by dark power. They struck fear into the surrounding lands, raiding villages, slaughtering wildlife, and spreading panic. The forest that had once been Greenwood the Great now came to be known as Mirkwood, its beauty tainted by shadow. Gandalf knew the signs well. This was no ordinary warlord. This was a dark power seeking dominion, spreading its roots like a weed across the land. He returned to his allies in the White Council, a body of the wise formed to unite the free peoples against rising threats. The council included some of the most powerful and knowledgeable beings in Middle-earth: Elrond of Rivendell, Galadriel of Lothlorien, Círdan the Shipwright, and the head of the Order of the Istari, Saruman the White. Gandalf spoke plainly and urgently. Something evil had taken root in Dol Guldur. He did not yet claim certainty, but he suspected it could be Sauron himself, the fallen Maia who had served Morgoth, the same who had forged the One Ring and brought the world to the brink of ruin in the Second Age. The suggestion was met with resistance. Saruman, proud and growing secretive, dismissed Gandalf's fears. He argued that Sauron had perished with the fall of Númenor, and that the ring, which was the key to his power, had long since been lost in the great depths of the Anduin. Without the ring, Saruman claimed, Sauron could not return in full force. The being in Dol Guldur, he insisted, was likely a lesser spirit, perhaps a Nazgul or some other remnant of the darkness. But Gandalf was not so easily dissuaded. He knew better than to ignore his instincts. He continued to study, to search, to listen. Over the years, he gathered more evidence stories of growing orc hosts, strange enchantments in the east, whispers of a great eye watching. He visited ancient ruins, consulted with elves in secret, and even walked the tombs of forgotten kings seeking answers, and all signs pointed back to Dol Guldur. Still, the White Council hesitated. Saruman, whose influence in the council had grown strong, counseled delay. He claimed to be watching the Gladden fields for signs of the ring and maintained that without it, Sauron could not act. He assured the council that if the Dark Lord ever did rise again, he would detect it. But Gandalf grew increasingly uneasy. He began to suspect that Saruman's delay was not born of caution, but of something darker, perhaps even envy or secret desire. Realizing that he could not rely on the council's support, Gandalf once again went to Dol Guldur, this time intending not only to observe, but to confront the power directly. Disguised and wary, he infiltrated the fortress. There, in its deepest dungeons, he uncovered a terrible truth. The Necromancer was not a Nazgul, not a wraith, not some mere shade of darkness. It was Sauron. He had returned, not in full form, but in spirit, gathering strength, biding his time. Gandalf also discovered that Sauron was seeking the One Ring, though he did not yet know where it lay. The Dark Lord's return was not only a possibility, it was reality. He had taken root once more in the world, and his plans were already in motion. The implications were staggering. If Sauron regained full power, the world would fall into shadow again. And if he were to recover the One Ring, not even the might of the elves or the strength of Númenorian blood would be able to stop him. Gandalf fled Dol Guldur, pursued by Sauron's servants, narrowly escaping with his life, but he returned with proof. He brought his findings to the White Council once more. This time, the truth could not be denied. Galadriel, always more attuned to the whispers of the world, supported him. Elrond agreed, seeing the danger not only to his people, but to all free peoples. Saruman, though visibly shaken, finally consented. The council resolved to act. In the year 2941 of the Third Age, the same year that Bilbo Baggins would set out on his unexpected journey, the White Council launched an assault on Dol Guldur. Galadriel and other elven powers joined forces with Gandalf, driving Sauron from the fortress. But though the Necromancer fled, he was not destroyed. He withdrew to the east, to the land of Mordor, where he would openly declare himself in time. The eye of Sauron rose once more in Barad-dûr. Though the battle was won, Gandalf remained uneasy. He had long suspected that the Dark Lord's ambitions were not yet complete, and his actions at Dol Guldur were only the beginning. Even as others celebrated, Gandalf continued his watch, knowing that a deeper war was still to come, a war that would hinge not on armies or weapons, but on a small golden ring and the quiet courage of unlikely heroes. And thus, the discovery of the Necromancer marked a turning point not only in the history of the Third Age, but in Gandalf's own journey. For now, he knew the stakes. He had glimpsed the face of the enemy, and from that moment forward, every step he took would be shaped by the knowledge that Sauron lived and that the fight for Middle-earth's future had truly begun. In the long twilight of the Third Age, as shadows crept across the edges of Middle-earth once more, a gathering of the wise was formed to stand as a bulwark against the rising dark. This alliance would become known as the White Council, a body of the most powerful and knowledgeable beings in Middle-earth, elves and Istari alike. It was created with a singular purpose: to guard against the return of the Shadow, and to ensure that the catastrophe of Morgoth's dominion in the First Age would never be repeated. The council's formation was proposed by Galadriel of Lothlorien, one of the oldest and most powerful elves still living in Middle-earth. Wise beyond reckoning, Galadriel had walked in the light of the two trees in Valinor before the world was marred. She had seen the rise and fall of kingdoms, and had long sensed a stirring in the east, a cold breath whispering across the lands. Galadriel trusted her intuition, and she saw in Gandalf, known in the west as Mithrandir, the spirit best suited to lead the effort against the encroaching darkness. From the first, Galadriel's heart leaned toward Gandalf. He was humble, kind, and perceptive, never ruling through authority but through inspiration. She saw in him the same depth of wisdom that had guided him even in his days as Olórin in the Timeless Halls. To her, Gandalf's empathy, curiosity, and tireless efforts to understand the peoples of Middle-earth made him the most suitable leader of the White Council. She offered him the headship openly and with great hope. But Gandalf refused. He had no desire for leadership or command. His task, as he saw it, was to serve, not to govern. Though he was likely the wisest among them, he feared the corruption that authority could bring. He had seen what pride had done to other Maiar. He had watched Sauron fall from grace, and he knew too well that power, even in noble hands, could quickly turn to tyranny. So, Gandalf declined the mantle. Into the vacuum stepped Saruman the White Kurumo, eldest of the Istari, and the one whom the Valar had originally chosen to lead the order. Among the wise, he was renowned for his knowledge of craft, of lore, and most importantly, of Sauron and his devices. He spoke with authority, commanded respect, and carried himself with the bearing of one who expected obedience. The others agreed to his leadership, and thus Saruman became the head of the White Council. At first, the council appeared unified and focused. It was composed of mighty figures: Saruman the White, Gandalf the Grey, Elrond Half, Elven of Rivendell, Galadriel of the Golden Wood, and Círdan the Shipwright, among others. Together they formed what should have been an unbreakable bastion of resistance to darkness, but the seeds of discord and hesitation were already present, sown deep in the heart of its leadership. Galadriel, though she had stepped back from power, never ceased to observe. She trusted Gandalf completely, often confiding in him her deepest fears about the return of evil. She watched Saruman carefully and saw changes in him as the years passed. His speeches grew more forceful, his temper shorter, his pride more pronounced. Yet outwardly, he remained committed to the council's cause, cloaking his ambitions in rhetoric and displays of knowledge. Gandalf, for his part, remained vigilant. He traveled far and wide, watching the movements of peoples, listening to the concerns of the humble, and gathering whispers that others might dismiss. It was through these efforts that he began to suspect the return of Sauron, long before it was considered plausible by others in the council. When he brought his suspicions before them, urging a direct investigation of Dol Guldur, he met with resistance, most notably from Saruman. Saruman had grown increasingly focused on the lore of the One Ring. He had pored over ancient texts, scoured the archives of Númenor and the elves, and devoted himself to understanding the mechanisms of power. His studies led him to a dangerous conclusion. If the ring were truly lost, as most believed, then Sauron could not return in his full strength. Without the ring, he reasoned, Sauron's might would be diminished, and any manifestation of him, such as the so-called Necromancer in Dol Guldur, could be dismissed as a lesser threat. Saruman's arguments were compelling. He spoke with the authority of a scholar, weaving facts with half-truths, masking his growing arrogance as confidence. He convinced many within the council to delay action, to focus instead on watching, waiting, and gathering more information. He dissuaded them from launching a direct assault on Dol Guldur, claiming it would be premature and risky. But Gandalf knew better. His instincts warned him of danger, and he trusted the signs he had seen and the whispers he had heard. Though the council hesitated, Gandalf chose to act on his own. He infiltrated Dol Guldur and discovered the truth: the Necromancer was none other than Sauron himself. Weakened, yes, but recovering, gathering his strength, his knowledge, and his servants. He returned to the council with proof, but even then, Saruman downplayed the discovery. He claimed that Sauron, without the ring, posed no true danger. Unbeknownst to the others, Saruman had grown obsessed with the ring, not with destroying it, but with finding it and mastering it for himself. He believed that through the ring, he could defeat Sauron and perhaps even surpass him. It was a subtle but devastating betrayal. The council did finally act, but only after years of delay. In 2941, under pressure from Gandalf and Galadriel, they launched an assault on Dol Guldur. Sauron, sensing the tide turning, abandoned the fortress and withdrew to Mordor. On the surface, it seemed a victory. Dol Guldur was purged. The shadow retreated, but the truth was darker. Sauron had not been destroyed, only displaced, and the long delay in action had allowed him time to rebuild in secret, to forge alliances, and to prepare the land of Mordor for war. The White Council's failure was not merely tactical. It was a failure of will, of unity, and of moral clarity. Pride had blinded its leader. Saruman's thirst for power had caused delays that allowed Sauron to rise unchecked. His jealousy of Gandalf, his belief in his own superiority, and his secret desire to possess the One Ring led him down a path of isolation and corruption. He began to build his own fortress, Orthanc, into a stronghold. He delved into forbidden knowledge and began experimenting with dark arts, all while maintaining the illusion of leadership. Galadriel saw it clearly. She began to turn away from Saruman and place her full trust in Gandalf. She supported him privately and ensured that he had allies in Lothlorien and Rivendell. Elrond too saw the wisdom in Gandalf's counsel and increasingly relied upon him. The balance of trust within the council began to shift, even if Saruman remained its nominal head. The council never again acted as a unified body after the attack on Dol Guldur. It slowly drifted into dormancy, its members retreating to their own realms, preparing for the war they knew would one day come. Gandalf remained the only one who truly continued the fight in the world, beyond the elven havens and the halls of knowledge. He journeyed among the free peoples, encouraging resistance, strengthening alliances, and seeking out hearts strong enough to bear the burden of the coming storm. The failures of the White Council would echo through the final years of the Third Age. When war returned to Middle-earth, it was not the Council that led the charge, but the remnants of men, the courage of hobbits, and the faith of a few elves and dwarves. The Council had possessed the power to stop Sauron's return, but pride, delay, and hidden ambition ensured the chance was lost. In the end, it was not wisdom alone that would save Middle-earth, but the resilience of the small and the overlooked, those who, like Gandalf himself, never sought power, but chose instead to serve. The Council, for all its brilliance, had failed to see that the greatest threats often come not from overwhelming force, but from within, from doubt, from fear, and from the slow, seductive pull of control. In the year 2941 of the Third Age, the world stood on the brink of transformation, though few could see it. In the east, Sauron was gathering his strength in secret. In the west, men and elves lived in uneasy peace, unaware of the darkness soon to come. Yet amidst these quiet years, it was not great kings or mighty armies that would shift the tides of history, but a wandering wizard, a band of displaced dwarves, and one unassuming hobbit from the Shire. Gandalf the Grey had long been a vigilant guardian of Middle-earth. Unlike Saruman, who secluded himself in study and pride, Gandalf roamed the land ceaselessly, gathering whispers, forging friendships, and tending the flickering lights of hope wherever he found them. He sensed that the storm was coming, a resurgence of evil, and knew that the peoples of Middle-earth would soon face a threat they were not prepared to confront. He had seen the signs, the darkening of Mirkwood, the return of the Necromancer, the unrest in the east. But to face the future, Gandalf also believed that the world had to resolve the past. And to him, that past lay beneath the shadow of the Lonely Mountain. The kingdom under the mountain Erebor had once stood as a beacon of dwarven wealth and pride. Its halls were vast and golden, filled with treasures wrought by unmatched craftsmanship. But all of that had been lost in a single, fiery breath. Smaug the Golden, a mighty dragon from the north, had descended upon Erebor in 2770, driven by greed and drawn by the dwarves' hoarded wealth. He laid waste to the kingdom, slew many of its people, and forced the survivors into exile. The survivors, led by King Thrain and later his son Thorin Oakenshield, became wanderers, a people without a home. For Gandalf, the loss of Erebor was more than a tragedy for the dwarves. It had unbalanced the entire region. Smaug's presence in the north, nesting atop a mountain of treasure, served as a constant threat to the free peoples. If Sauron were to ally with the dragon, or worse, awaken him in a time of war, it could spell disaster for the West. An enemy of such destructive power, unleashed at the right moment, could burn cities and break armies. Gandalf knew he needed to neutralize that threat before it could be used. His opportunity came in the form of Thorin Oakenshield. Gandalf encountered Thorin in Bree, where the dwarf prince brooded over maps and dreams of vengeance. Thorin sought a way to reclaim his homeland and avenge his people. He had grown weary of wandering and was willing to risk everything to retake Erebor. But he lacked a plan, and more importantly, a way to approach the dragon. Erebor was impregnable to any standard assault. A frontal attack would be suicide. What Thorin needed was subtlety and a thief. Gandalf, always thinking beyond the surface, saw not just a chance to aid Thorin, but to potentially change the fate of the entire North. If Erebor could be reclaimed, it would restore dwarven pride, create a powerful bastion against evil, and crucially remove Smaug from the board. But to do this, he needed to assemble a company that could approach the task with stealth and cunning, not brute force. And at the heart of it, he believed, needed to be someone utterly unexpected. It was then that Gandalf turned his thoughts to the Shire and to Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo, a quiet and respectable hobbit of Bag End, seemed the very opposite of a hero. He had no sword, no desire for adventure, and certainly no longing for gold or glory. But Gandalf saw something in Bilbo that even Bilbo had yet to recognize in himself: a quiet courage, a nimble mind, and a deep well of decency that could endure the trials ahead. More than that, Gandalf believed that involving a hobbit, a creature so overlooked by the great powers of the world, could have unpredictable consequences, which he saw as a strength rather than a weakness. Despite Bilbo's initial protests, Gandalf orchestrated the meeting at Bag End. One by one, the dwarves of Thorin's company arrived: Balin, Dwalin, Kili, Fili, and the others. The unexpected gathering bewildered Bilbo, and though he resisted at first, the Tookish part of his nature, that adventurous spark he had inherited from his mother's side, stirred under the surface. In the end, he agreed to join the quest, albeit reluctantly, and with no real understanding of what awaited him. Gandalf did not accompany them for the entirety of the journey. He had other business, dark business, that led him south to Dol Guldur. But his role as the architect of the quest, its secret guardian, never ceased. He provided Thorin with a map of Erebor and a key to the hidden door on the mountain side, both passed down from Thorin's father, Thrain, whom Gandalf had found imprisoned and dying in the dungeons of Dol Guldur years earlier. The key was crucial. It would allow Thorin's company to enter the mountain through a secret entrance, bypassing the dragon's defenses. As Thorin's company made their way east, they faced trolls, goblins, wolves, and the strange forest of Mirkwood. Bilbo, slowly and unexpectedly, grew into a leader. He outwitted trolls, escaped goblins, and even bested Gollum in the depths of the Misty Mountains, where, unknown to all, he came into possession of a small, unremarkable gold ring. Gandalf, when he learned of it, suspected little at first, but he noted the change in Bilbo's demeanor and kept the knowledge tucked away. The company ultimately reached Erebor, and through daring and luck, Bilbo entered the dragon's lair. He conversed with Smaug, learned of the beast's weaknesses, and stole a single gem, the Arkenstone, heirloom of Thorin's line. Smaug, enraged, flew to destroy Lake Town, only to be slain by Bard the Bowman. With the dragon dead, the dwarves reclaimed Erebor, but their victory was far from peaceful. The horde of Erebor, unguarded and immense, drew the attention of many. Men of Lake Town came seeking recompense for the destruction wrought by Smaug. Elves of Mirkwood came as well, seeking ancient claims and alliance. But Thorin, now obsessed with his reclaimed throne and gold, became consumed by what dwarves called dragon sickness, a madness born of greed and paranoia. He refused to share the treasure, and war nearly broke out at the foot of the mountain. Gandalf returned at the climax of the conflict. As armies gathered, he appeared to warn them of a greater threat, a vast host of orcs from the north sent by Sauron, who sought to claim the mountain for their own. In the battle of the 5 armies, dwarves, men, and elves united against the orcs. Thorin, regaining his honor at the end, fell in battle alongside Fili and Kili. Bilbo returned home, changed forever. The quest had succeeded, Erebor was free, Smaug was dead, and the north was strengthened. But Gandalf's foresight had done more than he intended. The death of Smaug removed a powerful weapon from Sauron's grasp. The alliance between elves, men, and dwarves, forged in the fire of war, would later become vital in the War of the Ring. And most crucially, Bilbo had returned to the Shire with the One Ring. At the time, Gandalf did not know the ring's true nature. He suspected it was a trinket of power, but not the ring. It was not until decades later, when Bilbo's aging slowed and the ring's influence deepened, that Gandalf began to question its origin. His investigation would lead him to Gollum, to the archives of Minas Tirith, and ultimately to the confirmation that Bilbo had indeed found Sauron's lost weapon. Thus, the quest for Erebor, born of a desire to reclaim a kingdom and eliminate a dragon, set into motion events that would define the fate of Middle-earth. It restored a kingdom, united races long divided, exposed the creeping power of Sauron, and brought the One Ring into the hands of someone who might, in time, have the strength to destroy it. Gandalf's choice to involve a small hobbit in a dwarven cause, to stir the stagnant waters of the world, became the first step in a long and perilous road, a road that would lead to the fires of Mount Doom. The story of The Hobbit is often remembered as a tale of adventure, treasure, and unexpected heroism. But behind the songs and battles, beneath the surface of dwarves reclaiming their home and a hobbit finding courage, there was a deeper, more deliberate strategy at play, a secret plan devised by Gandalf the Grey. To the casual eye, Gandalf appeared as little more than a wise and eccentric wizard, nudging Thorin Oakenshield's company toward Erebor. Yet in truth, he was orchestrating events with far greater intent. He had not only chosen this quest to aid the dwarves, or to give Bilbo Baggins a taste of the wider world, he was also using it as a calculated maneuver in the larger struggle against Sauron, the growing shadow that few yet recognized for what it was. By the time of the quest for Erebor, Gandalf had long harbored deep fears about the being known as the Necromancer, who had entrenched himself in the fortress of Dol Guldur in southern Mirkwood. Gandalf's earlier investigations, and especially his harrowing infiltration of Dol Guldur, had confirmed what he had long suspected. The Necromancer was, in fact, Sauron. Though not yet at full power, Sauron was regaining strength, spreading fear and gathering agents in secret. But he was not ready to reveal himself openly, not while the White Council still had the power to challenge him. Gandalf knew that the longer Sauron remained undisturbed, the stronger he would become. He also knew that Saruman, head of the White Council, was increasingly resistant to taking action. Saruman's pride, ambition, and secret desire to find the One Ring for himself had caused him to counsel delay again and again. Thus, Gandalf needed to force the issue. He needed to compel the White Council to act against Dol Guldur, but he also knew that a direct confrontation with Sauron would be dangerous. The Dark Lord, cunning and strategic, would likely detect any move made against him unless his attention was drawn elsewhere. This was the foundation of Gandalf's secret plan. If he could orchestrate a major event in the north, one significant enough to demand Sauron's focus and possibly require the movement of his agents, then the White Council might have the opportunity to strike while the enemy's attention was divided. The attack on Dol Guldur could not be a standalone assault. It needed cover. And thus, the quest for Erebor became more than a mission to slay a dragon. It became a carefully timed distraction, one with the potential to unseat Sauron before his power could fully consolidate. But Gandalf could not simply create an artificial distraction. The quest had to be real. It had to be driven by authentic motivations and players who truly sought their goal. Thorin Oakenshield's longing to reclaim Erebor was genuine, rooted in the legacy of his house and the deep wounds inflicted by Smaug's attack. And so Gandalf seized the opportunity, aligning Thorin's ambition with his own wider strategy. Crucially, Gandalf chose Bilbo Baggins to join the company not merely for the role of burglar, but as a test of sorts. He believed that in hobbits lay a quiet and unshakable resilience, one that the great powers of the world often overlooked. Bilbo represented the very opposite of greed and ambition. His inclusion would temper the dwarves' pride and inject into the journey a kind of unassuming strength that Gandalf hoped would prove essential. Gandalf also sensed that this humble creature might one day play an even greater role, though he did not yet know how or when. Gandalf's mentorship of Bilbo was subtle. He never laid out a grand plan or forced Bilbo into heroism. Instead, he planted seeds through encouragement, through challenge, through placing Bilbo in situations that required growth. At Bag End, he tested Bilbo's courage by inviting 13 unexpected guests into his quiet life. On the road, he gave Bilbo room to find his own strengths. Whether facing trolls or goblins, or even the enigmatic Gollum beneath the misty mountains, Bilbo learned not by being saved, but by being forced to act. But just as the journey entered its most perilous phase, the twisted depths of Mirkwood Gandalf departed. To many, this seemed like abandonment, but in truth, it was the next step in his larger plan. Gandalf left the company not because he had lost interest, but because the moment had come to act against Sauron. The White Council, after much persuasion, had finally agreed to launch a direct assault on Dol Guldur. Gandalf was needed to lead that effort. His absence from the company allowed him to fulfill his dual mission. While Thorin's group advanced toward Erebor, creating a stir in the north, Gandalf moved south to help drive Sauron out of his stronghold. This timing was no coincidence. The simultaneous advance on Erebor and assault on Dol Guldur was designed to stretch Sauron's resources and test his readiness. If Sauron responded to the dwarves' campaign by moving agents to the north, it would weaken his hold on Dol Guldur. If he remained focused on Mirkwood, he would risk losing influence over Erebor, a mountain filled with wealth and strategic value. Either way, Gandalf would gain critical insight into Sauron's strength and tactics, and perhaps even deliver a serious blow. The plan worked. As Thorin and company neared Erebor, Sauron's eyes turned north. Orcs began to move in large numbers, mustering beneath the mountains. Spies and messengers flowed back and forth across the land. Smaug, awakened by the dwarves' intrusion, went on a rampage, drawing further attention. Meanwhile, the White Council descended upon Dol Guldur. Galadriel, Elrond, and other great powers joined Gandalf in battle. Though Sauron escaped retreating to Mordor, he was unseated from his lair. The fortress was cleansed, the shadows scattered, and his plans were forced into the open sooner than he intended. Back in the north, the death of Smaug created a new power vacuum. The Battle of the Five Armies erupted a confrontation not just of men, elves, and dwarves, but of orcs sent by Sauron himself. The chaos served Gandalf's broader goals. It revealed the hidden strength of the enemy, forced alliances between the free peoples, and perhaps most importantly, removed a powerful and unpredictable force from the board. With Smaug gone, Sauron had lost a potential ally of immense destructive power. As for Bilbo, Gandalf had watched his transformation with quiet satisfaction. The hobbit who once hesitated to leave his doorstep had now stood before a dragon, outwitted Gollum, brokered peace with an elven king, and walked away from a mountain of gold. Bilbo had changed not into a warrior, but into something even rarer, a person who had faced greed, fear, and temptation, and walked away with his soul intact. Yet the greatest consequence of Gandalf's secret plan was something even he had not foreseen. During the escape from the goblins, Bilbo had found, or been found, by a simple gold ring. He did not know its origin, nor did Gandalf grasp its full significance, though he was deeply suspicious. But that small, forgotten treasure was the one ring, the very object Sauron needed to complete his return to power. It had passed from Gollum into the hands of a gentle hobbit who had no ambition, no lust for domination, and no awareness of its true power. In time, Gandalf's fears would grow. He would study the ring, test Bilbo's reactions to it, and eventually uncover its identity through years of careful research. But that lay ahead. For now, the quest for Erebor had accomplished its goals. Smaug was dead, Erebor reclaimed, alliances forged, Sauron expelled from Dol Guldur. The plan had succeeded in both its visible and hidden aims. The tale of the Hobbit is often seen as light-hearted, compared to the later wars of Middle-earth. But in Gandalf's eyes, it was a linchpin moment, a carefully timed stroke in a much greater game. Through distraction, pressure, and subtle manipulation, he had helped weaken Sauron's position long before the enemy knew the battle had truly begun. And at the center of it all was a small hobbit who had walked willingly into danger, and who now carried unwittingly the fate of the world in his pocket. In the long twilight before the War of the Ring, when the world still basked in the illusion of peace, Gandalf the Grey moved like a quiet sentinel through the troubled lands of Middle-earth. Though kingdoms busied themselves with their own matters, the rebuilding of Dale, the commerce of Esgaroth, and the hidden strength of Gondor, Gandalf sensed a deeper current shifting beneath the surface. His sharp instincts told him that evil, though seemingly subdued, was not gone. It had merely recoiled, waiting, watching, gathering strength once more. Gandalf's fears were rooted in Dol Guldur, the dark fortress that loomed over southern Mirkwood like a blight on the forest. Since the Third Age's middle centuries, a presence known only as the Necromancer had occupied the stronghold, shrouding the once bright wood in creeping corruption. The trees themselves grew sickly and twisted. Beasts became savage. Strange whispers drifted on the wind. And though the Necromancer did not act openly, Gandalf suspected something far worse than the name suggested. As early as the 2062nd of the Third Age, Gandalf began his investigations into the identity of this dark power. He did not act in haste. Gandalf's strength was never in brute force. It was in wisdom, patience, and discernment. He visited old strongholds, spoke with wandering peoples, consulted with elves, and quietly observed the darkening of the world. Every sign, every whisper, every omen seemed to suggest the same thing. The Necromancer was not some mere wraith or forgotten sorcerer. He was Sauron, the Dark Lord of old, thought defeated but never destroyed. In 2063, Gandalf finally entered Dol Guldur in secret. It was a dangerous gambit, for even the Maia are not invulnerable. What he found within confirmed his worst fears. The Necromancer's presence was a powerful shadow, cloaked and diminished. Yes, but ancient and malevolent. Gandalf confronted him but could not yet force a reckoning. Sauron, still in the early stages of regaining his strength, fled before Gandalf's arrival, retreating into the east. For a time, the darkness seemed to lift. Mirkwood lightened, and the world breathed easier. This temporary withdrawal became known as the Watchful Peace, a quiet span of nearly 400 years. But Gandalf was not satisfied. He knew Sauron had not been vanquished. He had merely chosen to bide his time, perhaps traveling to the distant east to marshal forgotten allies and gather knowledge. There, among the shadowed lands of Rhûn and Khand, he could move undetected, far from the vigilance of the free peoples. Gandalf remained ever watchful during these centuries, traveling often and speaking urgently to the wise. He suspected that the watchful peace would not last. He was right. In 2460, Sauron returned to Dol Guldur. This time, he came stronger, more cunning, and more deeply entrenched. He no longer fled from investigation. He welcomed secrecy and delay, knowing that each year granted him time to prepare. He began sending out emissaries, searching for the One Ring, which had been lost to him for over 2 millennia. That quest for the ring became central to his resurgence, for without it, Sauron could never reclaim his former dominion in full. But with it, he would become a terror beyond anything the Third Age had yet seen. Gandalf, ever wary, began pressing the White Council to act. The council comprised of the wisest and most powerful beings in Middle-earth, including Elrond, Galadriel, Círdan, and Saruman, had long been aware of Dol Guldur's menace, but consensus eluded them. Saruman, nominally the head of the council, repeatedly counseled patience and denial. He argued that the Necromancer posed no immediate threat, and that the One Ring had likely been washed away into the sea. But Gandalf suspected that Saruman's motivations were no longer pure. The head of the White Council had begun his own secret search for the ring, believing he alone could wield it for good, or at least for power under the guise of wisdom. Galadriel, by contrast, trusted Gandalf implicitly. She had long recognized the strength of his heart and the purity of his purpose. It was she who first wished Gandalf to lead the council, but he had declined, preferring action over leadership. Still, Galadriel remained one of his staunchest allies. It was with her support that Gandalf planned his second, more decisive visit to Dol Guldur. In the year 2850, Gandalf once more entered the fortress, this time in greater peril. Sauron had grown bolder and more confident. Within Dol Guldur, Gandalf discovered not only the spreading influence of the Dark Lord, but also an unspeakable sight. The broken and withered form of Thrain II, Thorin Oakenshield's father, held prisoner in the dungeons. Thrain had vanished years before on a solitary mission to Erebor, only to fall into the clutches of Sauron. Delirious and near death, Thrain entrusted Gandalf with the last of his strength, passing on the key and map to the Lonely Mountain, the very tools that would set the quest for Erebor into motion. Gandalf barely escaped Dol Guldur with his life, returning to the White Council with grim tidings. The evidence was undeniable now. The Necromancer was Sauron. He had returned. He was searching for the ring. And unless checked soon, he would rise to dominate all of Middle-earth. It took another decade of persuasion, but finally, in 2941, the same year that Thorin and Bilbo began their journey to Erebor, the White Council agreed to act. With Elrond, Galadriel, and even Saruman at his side, Gandalf led the assault on Dol Guldur. The battle was fierce, though much of it remained unseen by the peoples of Middle-earth. Magic clashed with sorcery, light with shadow. The fortress trembled, and at last, Sauron was driven out. His body, his influence, his physical presence, all cast away from Mirkwood. Yet victory rang hollow in Gandalf's heart. Sauron had escaped, not destroyed, only displaced. He had retreated to Mordor, the land that had long awaited his return. There, the fires of Mount Doom were rekindled. The Dark Towers rose again. The Black Gate was repaired. From the depths of Barad-dûr, Sauron's eye turned once more toward conquest. Dol Guldur had been only a staging ground. Mordor was his true dominion. The war was only beginning. What troubled Gandalf most, however, was Saruman. During the assault on Dol Guldur, Saruman had at last revealed a willingness to confront the enemy, but his motives remained clouded. Gandalf suspected that the White Wizard no longer served purely for the good of Middle-earth. The delays, the dismissals, the sudden enthusiasm for acting only once it served Saruman's interests, all of it pointed to a darker truth. Saruman desired the ring, and worse, he had learned that the Gladden fields where Isildur was slain might still hold the lost treasure. As Mordor darkened, Gandalf began quietly searching for the ring himself, not to wield it, but to find and destroy it before it could fall into the wrong hands. This secret mission brought him time and again to the Shire, where he kept a close eye on Bilbo Baggins. For even though Bilbo's strange tale of a game of riddles and a magic ring had seemed harmless at the time, the seed of suspicion had already been planted. The ring that Bilbo carried was no ordinary trinket. Its power was subtle, yet undeniable. Bilbo's behavior had changed. He was aging slowly. He was protective of the ring. And though he used it sparingly, Gandalf feared what it might truly be. The shadow had returned not as an overwhelming storm, but as a creeping dusk, coiling around the edges of the world. While the free people still lived in relative peace, Gandalf moved ceaselessly, seeking knowledge, uncovering secrets, preparing the way for the inevitable storm. The darkness had not been banished. It had only shifted east into Mordor, where it grew in strength, awaiting its moment to strike. And so Gandalf watched. He searched. He listened. For the war to come would not be fought by great kings alone, but by small hands in quiet places, and the fate of all would soon rest on the most unlikely of bearers. The One Ring, a small, unassuming band of gold, seemingly plain and without adornment, held within it a power so terrible and profound that its very existence shaped the fate of Middle-earth for ages beyond reckoning. For most, the ring was a myth, a whisper of ancient days best forgotten. For many, it was simply a curiosity or a trinket of old lore. But for Gandalf the Grey, the ring was an ever-present shadow on the horizon, a threat that grew more urgent with each passing year. His discovery of the ring's true nature, the painstaking years of investigation that followed, and the careful, almost fatherly guidance he offered to Frodo Baggins, the hobbit chosen to bear this burden, form one of the most crucial and delicate chapters in the history of Middle-earth. Gandalf's first brush with the ring was indirect yet profound. When Bilbo Baggins returned to the Shire after the quest for Erebor, he carried with him this strange artifact, found in the dark depths beneath the Misty Mountains. To Bilbo, it was simply a magic ring that made him invisible, an odd but useful device, an advantage in times of trouble. For years, Bilbo lived a mostly peaceful life, though the ring seemed to cling to him with a strange insistence, refusing to be parted with, even as it subtly shaped his moods and choices. The hobbit did not understand the true peril that lurked beneath its glittering surface. Gandalf, however, was not so easily fooled. Long before Bilbo's return to the Shire, Gandalf's keen mind and vast knowledge of the histories of Middle-earth had led him to suspect the existence of the One Ring, Sauron's master ring, forged in the fires of Mount Doom during the Second Age. This ring was not merely a token of power. It was a vessel containing much of Sauron's own essence, crafted to dominate all other rings of power and their bearers. It held a dark will, a corrupting influence that could bend even the strongest souls toward evil. To lose the ring was a disaster, but to find it again was equally dangerous. Gandalf's suspicions were first aroused by subtle signs: the prolonged lifespan of Bilbo, the reluctance to give up the ring, and the slow but unmistakable change in the hobbit's nature. The wizard watched from afar, observing the gentle hobbit grow more withdrawn and secretive, even as he outwardly clung to his cheerful demeanor. Though Bilbo was beloved by his neighbors, Gandalf knew better. The ring was exerting its will, weaving a web of subtle obsession. Driven by his suspicions, Gandalf embarked on a long and meticulous investigation. He traveled far and wide, piecing together fragments of forgotten lore and history. He sought counsel with Elrond in Rivendell, whose knowledge of the past was unmatched, and with the scribes of Minas Tirith, where ancient scrolls recorded the tale of Isildur's last stand and the loss of the ring in the river Anduin. These stories, long buried in the dust of ages, became keys to understanding the present. The wizard's most crucial step was confronting Gollum, the twisted creature who had once possessed the ring for nearly 5 centuries before losing it to Bilbo. Through careful inquiry and an exhausting search, Gandalf tracked Gollum deep into the wilds. In dark and shadowed caverns, with patience and gentle words, he extracted from the creature's broken mind the terrible truth. The ring Bilbo bore was indeed the One Ring. This confirmation changed everything. Gandalf's heart grew heavy with the knowledge. The ring was more dangerous than even he had feared. Its power was insidious, promising power and dominion, but delivering corruption and ruin. Destroying the ring was the only way to ensure Sauron's defeat, but it was a task beyond any ordinary hero. The ring would weigh heavily upon its bearer, corrupting and tempting with every step. Choosing the ring's bearer was a challenge Gandalf faced with great care. It was not a task for kings or mighty warriors whose ambition could be turned to darkness. Instead, Gandalf chose Frodo Baggins, Bilbo's nephew, a simple and unassuming hobbit of the Shire. To many, Frodo was an unlikely hero. He loved the quiet life, the comforts of home, and had little desire for adventure or glory. Yet Gandalf knew that hobbits, by their very nature, were uniquely suited to resist the ring's seduction. Their humility, resilience, and contentment with the small pleasures of life gave them an inner strength invisible to the great powers of the world. Gandalf's mentorship of Frodo was a study in patience and wisdom. He did not overwhelm the young hobbit with fear or heavy burdens at once. Instead, he revealed the gravity of the ring's power slowly, imparting knowledge in measured doses. He encouraged Frodo's courage, instilling confidence while allowing him space to grow. Gandalf understood that the journey ahead was as much one of the spirit as of the body. Equipping Frodo for his perilous task, Gandalf provided not only counsel but also practical aid. The sword Sting, capable of glowing blue in the presence of orcs. The elven cloak gifted by Galadriel that would help conceal him. And, most importantly, the knowledge and resolve to see the mission through. Gandalf's role was that of a guide and guardian, knowing well that he could not accompany Frodo all the way. His duties required him to confront other dangers, most notably Saruman's treachery and the rising armies of Mordor. Throughout the journey, Gandalf's deep knowledge of Middle-earth proved invaluable. He understood the histories and politics of its peoples, the behaviors of its creatures, and the subtle magics that pervaded the land. When he appeared at critical moments, whether rescuing Frodo from the Barrow Downs or leading the Fellowship through the mines of Moria, his presence steadied those around him. Yet even Gandalf was not immune to the ring's shadow. His wisdom was tempered by caution, knowing that the greatest threat was not always the visible enemy but the temptation and despair that the ring could sow within hearts. The burden Frodo bore was immense and unrelenting. From the moment he took the ring from Bilbo's hands, he carried not only a physical weight but a spiritual one. The ring whispered promises of power, peace, and escape from fear. Yet it always demanded more secrecy, more sacrifice, more surrender. Frodo's journey to Mount Doom was a path of hardship, temptation, and loneliness. Yet Gandalf's faith in him never wavered. Gandalf's belief in Frodo was rooted in more than hope. It was an understanding that the smallest person could change the course of the future. In a world dominated by kings and warriors, it was the quiet bravery of a hobbit, armed with nothing but heart and resolve, that might overcome the greatest evil. This truth became the heart of Gandalf's guidance and his enduring legacy. In choosing Frodo, Gandalf also chose the path of sacrifice. He accepted that the mission would be fraught with danger and that many might fall. Yet he also knew that the Fellowship's unity, the alliances forged between elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits, would be a beacon against the darkness. Through Gandalf's wisdom, the Fellowship became more than a band of travelers. It became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring fight against despair. The story of the Ring and Frodo's burden is not merely one of power and corruption, but one of profound human and hobbit spirit. It is a testament to the belief that courage can be found in the most unexpected places, that even the smallest light can hold back the deepest darkness. Gandalf's role as mentor, protector, and unwavering believer in the good within others was central to this epic tale. The One Ring, with all its peril, might have been the greatest threat Middle-earth ever faced. But with Gandalf's guidance and Frodo's courage, the chance for salvation remained alive. Together, they carried the hope that one day the ring could be destroyed, Sauron defeated, and peace restored. This hope, fragile yet unyielding, became the foundation on which the final chapters of Middle-earth's history would be written. In the end, Gandalf's wisdom, patience, and deep understanding of both the world and the hearts of those who lived in it were as vital as any sword or spell. It was through these qualities that he prepared Frodo not just to bear the ring, but to carry the weight of a world's fate and to walk step by step into legend. The formation of the Fellowship of the Ring stands as one of the most defining and momentous events in the long history of Middle-earth. At a time when the shadow of Sauron stretched ever wider, threatening to plunge the world into darkness once more, a fragile alliance was forged, uniting representatives from the Free People's elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits alike, with a singular mission: to destroy the One Ring and thereby defeat the Dark Lord once and for all. At the heart of this alliance stood Gandalf the Grey, a figure whose wisdom, strength, and leadership would guide and shape the Fellowship through its earliest steps, through trials and tragedy, and beyond into legend. The story begins with the Council of Elrond, convened in Rivendell in the year 3018 of the Third Age. This meeting was called to discuss the growing threat of Sauron, which by then was impossible to ignore. The truth of the One Ring's survival was finally revealed, the very ring that had been lost when Isildur was slain, the ring that held the essence of Sauron's power, the ring that could dominate all others. It was a revelation that shook all present to their core, for the ring was the key to Sauron's return to full power, and it was now in the hands of a humble hobbit named Frodo Baggins. Elrond, Lord of Rivendell, declared that the ring could not be allowed to remain where it was, for its influence threatened to corrupt and destroy all who came near. The only way to prevent this was to cast it into the fires of Mount Doom, the volcanic heart of Mordor where it was originally forged. But such a task would require great courage and sacrifice, and none could travel alone through the perilous lands ruled by Sauron's growing armies. Thus, it was decided that a fellowship must be formed, a company of 9 representatives, chosen from the free peoples to protect the ring-bearer and help him complete this desperate quest. The number 9 was deliberate, meant to counterbalance the 9 ring-wraiths who served Sauron, embodying the forces of darkness. The members were chosen not merely for their martial prowess, but for their character, wisdom, and the hope they represented for their peoples. Gandalf was entrusted with the leadership of the Fellowship. His role was crucial, not only as the ring-bearer's protector, but also as the guide and strategist for the company. Gandalf accepted this responsibility with a profound sense of duty. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, that the power of the ring would test not just the strength of the body but the resilience of the spirit. Yet Gandalf's faith in the Fellowship's purpose, and in Frodo's courage, was unwavering. The company itself was an extraordinary assembly of Middle-earth's peoples. Frodo Baggins was the ring-bearer, chosen for his unexpected strength and humility. By his side stood Samwise Gamgee, his steadfast gardener and closest friend, whose loyalty would prove unbreakable. 2 other hobbits, Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, joined the journey, bringing youthful courage and cheerfulness to the company. Representing men were Aragorn, the ranger and rightful heir to the throne of Gondor, and Boromir, son of the steward of Gondor, whose valor was matched only by his internal struggles. Legolas, the elf prince of Mirkwood, brought keen eyes and unmatched archery skills, while Gimli, son of Glóin, represented the sturdy and determined dwarves. Together, under Gandalf's guidance, they embodied the hope of a world fighting for its survival. Leaving Rivendell, the Fellowship set out eastward, their journey shadowed by the ever-present threat of Sauron's spies and servants. Their path took them through vast forests, rolling hills, and towering mountain ranges. But it was the mines of Moria, an ancient dwarven stronghold beneath the misty mountains, that would prove their gravest challenge yet. Moria, once a flourishing kingdom known as Khazad-dûm, had long since fallen to darkness. The dwarves had delved too greedily and too deep, awakening an ancient terror, a Balrog, a creature of fire and shadow, a Maia corrupted like Gandalf himself. The Fellowship knew the risk in passing through the mines, but alternatives were limited. The mountain passes were beset by orcs and worse, and time was of the essence. As the company entered Moria's dark and labyrinthine halls, the weight of ages seemed to press down upon them. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the echoing footsteps and occasional distant sounds of orcs. The once great halls were crumbling and overrun. The air was thick with the stench of decay and menace. In Moria, the Fellowship faced relentless attacks from goblins and orcs, Their strength and unity were tested repeatedly as they fought for survival in twisting corridors and vast underground chambers. Gandalf's leadership was vital during these moments, his wisdom guiding them through the darkness and danger. But the greatest trial awaited in the Chamber of Mazarbul, where the company discovered the tomb of Balin, the dwarf lord, who had tried and failed to reclaim Moria for his people. The sight was a grim reminder of the price of greed and ambition, and the stakes of their quest. Their passage culminated in the confrontation on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. The Balrog emerged from the depths, a towering figure wreathed in shadow and flame, wielding a fiery whip and sword. Its presence was terrifying, a force of primordial darkness from an age long past. Gandalf stood firm, challenging the creature with words of command and the power of his staff. "You cannot pass," Gandalf declared, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. He shattered the narrow stone bridge beneath the Balrog's feet, sending the beast plummeting into the abyss. But as it fell, the Balrog's fiery whip lashed out, wrapping around Gandalf and dragging him down into the darkness with it. The Fellowship watched in horror and disbelief. Their leader had fallen, lost in the depths of Moria, leaving them vulnerable and uncertain. The loss was profound, shaking the company to its core. Gandalf's sacrifice had bought them time, but at a tremendous cost. For days after, the company mourned. Frodo felt the weight of the burden heavier than ever, his path darker and more uncertain. The others struggled with fear and doubt, but they resolved to carry on, honoring Gandalf's sacrifice by continuing the quest. Gandalf's fall was not the end. Unknown to the Fellowship, his spirit endured beyond death. After a fierce battle in the depths, Gandalf defeated the Balrog but was himself transformed. Returning to Middle-earth as Gandalf the White, a being more powerful and radiant, sent back to aid the free peoples in their darkest hour. But this return was still to come, and for now, the Fellowship journeyed on without him. The formation of the Fellowship was a bold testament to unity and hope amidst despair. It symbolized the courage to stand against overwhelming darkness, the willingness of diverse peoples to unite for a common cause, and the strength found in friendship and loyalty. Gandalf's leadership and sacrifice embodied the qualities needed to confront the encroaching shadow: wisdom, bravery, and selflessness. Their journey from Rivendell to the shattered halls of Moria and beyond into the wild and war-torn lands marked the beginning of an epic struggle that would decide the fate of all. Though broken by tragedy, the Fellowship remained bound by their shared purpose, their resolve steeled by Gandalf's example and the knowledge that the hope of Middle-earth rested on their shoulders. The tale of the Fellowship, its forging, its trials, and Gandalf's fall would be remembered for ages as a beacon of light in a darkening world, a reminder that even in the face of despair, courage and unity could kindle the spark of salvation. The journey of Gandalf through Middle-earth is not merely a tale of wisdom, courage, and guidance. It is also a profound story of sacrifice, transformation, and renewal. Few moments in the vast history of Arda carry as much weight and significance as Gandalf's fall in the mines of Moria, his transcendence beyond the bounds of mortal life, and his subsequent resurrection by Eru Ilúvatar, the supreme deity who shaped the world itself. This chapter of Gandalf's life marks a turning point not only for the wizard himself, but for the entire struggle against the darkness that threatened to consume Middle-earth. When the Fellowship of the Ring entered the ancient halls of Khazad-dûm, they did so with heavy hearts but unwavering resolve. Moria, once a proud dwarven kingdom, had become a realm of shadow and peril, overrun by orcs and home to an ancient evil, a Balrog, a Maia corrupted in the First Age by the dark Vala Morgoth. This creature of flame and shadow was no mere beast, but a primordial force of destruction and terror, rivaling Gandalf himself in power and age. The confrontation between Gandalf and the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm was not simply a battle of strength, but a cosmic clash. A confrontation of two immortal spirits bound by origins, tracing back to the creation of the world. Gandalf stood firm as the Balrog advanced, his voice ringing with the authority of ages. "You cannot pass," he declared, his staff planted firmly on the stone bridge. his sword glamdring in hand. In that moment, Gandalf embodied the resistance of light against overwhelming darkness. The bridge shattered beneath the Balrog's feet, sending the fiery demon plunging into the abyss below. But in one final act of desperation, the Balrog's whip lashed out and ensnared Gandalf, dragging him down into the darkness alongside it. This was not the end of Gandalf, but the beginning of a trial that transcended life and death. Falling into the deep caverns beneath Moria, Gandalf and the Balrog engaged in a prolonged and terrible battle that lasted for what seemed like days. Their fight raged through subterranean halls, across icy peaks, and down into the very roots of the world. The earth itself trembled under the force of their conflict. This was a confrontation not just of bodies, but of spirits, an echo of the ancient wars of the First Age, when the Maiar first rebelled and fell into darkness. Gandalf's mortal form was shattered, yet his spirit endured. It was in this state, caught between life and death, that Gandalf's true transformation began. He journeyed beyond the confines of time and space, beyond the mortal world and its sorrows, to the presence of Eru Ilúvatar, the supreme being who had created the universe, the Valar, and the Maiar themselves. Eru's intervention in Gandalf's fate was unprecedented. Though the Maiar were divine beings, they were bound to the physical world and its limits, sent by the Valar to assist the peoples of Middle-earth. Gandalf's mission was critical, and his sacrifice in Moria had proven his commitment. Recognizing the unique necessity of his task, Eru allowed Gandalf to be sent back to the world of the living, renewed and empowered to complete the struggle against Sauron. This divine resurrection was not a mere return to life, but a rebirth. Gandalf was granted new strength, wisdom, and authority. He became Gandalf the White, taking up the mantle and rank once held by Saruman, the chief of the Istari who had fallen into corruption. The transformation was symbolic and literal. His gray robes were shed, replaced by shining white, signifying purity, renewal, and supremacy over his former peers. For a time, Gandalf's whereabouts were unknown. His companions mourned him deeply, grappling with the loss of their guide and protector. Frodo and the other members of the Fellowship faced their trials without his presence, uncertain whether they would see him again. But when Gandalf reappeared, it was with a presence more commanding and luminous than before, a beacon of hope in a darkening world. Gandalf's return as Gandalf the White marked a shift in the balance of power within the Order of Wizards. Saruman, once the White Wizard and leader of the Istari, had succumbed to pride, jealousy, and a lust for power. He betrayed his mission, allying himself with Sauron and seeking the One Ring for his own ends. Gandalf's resurrection effectively dethroned Saruman, signaling a reversal of fortunes and the restoration of true leadership among the forces of good. With his new authority, Gandalf took on a more active and direct role in the unfolding war against Sauron. His knowledge deepened, his power increased, and his resolve hardened. He rallied the free peoples, inspiring kings, warriors, and common folk alike. He orchestrated alliances, uncovered Saruman's betrayal, and confronted the forces of darkness on multiple fronts. Gandalf the White was more than a wizard. He was a living embodiment of hope and renewal. His very existence symbolized the possibility of redemption, the triumph of light over shadow, and the enduring spirit of resistance even in the face of overwhelming odds. His resurrection served as a potent reminder that death was not always an end but could be a passage to greater strength and purpose. This transformation also deepened Gandalf's connection to the divine will guiding Middle-earth. As one who had seen beyond the veil of death and returned by the grace of Eru Ilúvatar, Gandalf carried the weight of a mission that transcended mere politics or warfare. He was a messenger of the ultimate design, a guardian of balance, and a herald of the age to come. Gandalf's death and rebirth carried profound thematic significance within the wider narrative. It echoed timeless motifs found in myth and legend: the hero who must die and be reborn, the sacrifice that leads to salvation, the light that returns to dispel darkness. Through his transformation, the story of Middle-earth reaffirmed its message of hope, resilience, and the power of selflessness. As Gandalf the White, he became the guiding force behind the final campaigns against Sauron. His wisdom and strength helped to rally the disparate forces of men, elves, and dwarves, uniting them against a common enemy. His counsel was invaluable to leaders such as Aragorn, Theoden, and Denethor, helping to turn the tide of war when all seemed lost. Moreover, Gandalf's renewed power allowed him to confront Saruman directly, challenging the fallen wizard's corrupt rule at Isengard and breaking his hold over the lands and peoples he had deceived. This confrontation symbolized the struggle not only against external darkness, but the internal corruption that could threaten even those sworn to protect the world. In this role, Gandalf embodied the highest ideals of the Istari: wisdom tempered by humility, power wielded with restraint, and a devotion to the well-being of all free peoples. His journey from Grey to White was a testament to growth, renewal, and the eternal fight between good and evil. Ultimately, Gandalf's sacrifice and resurrection shaped the very course of Middle-earth's fate. His death at Moria was a moment of despair but also a necessary trial, purifying and strengthening him. His rebirth empowered him to lead the final resistance against Sauron and to guide Frodo and the Fellowship towards their ultimate goal, the destruction of the One Ring. This passage from death to rebirth enriched Gandalf's character and legacy, elevating him beyond a mere wizard or counselor into a symbol of hope and transformation. It illustrated that even in the darkest moments, when all seems lost, there is the potential for renewal and victory. Gandalf's story is one of courage in the face of death, faith in a higher purpose, and the enduring power of sacrifice. From the depths of Moria to the heights of white-robed authority, his journey stands as a beacon for all who face overwhelming darkness. That light can return, that heroes can rise again, and that the fate of the world may yet be shaped by those willing to give everything for the cause of good. His transformation from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White is more than a change in color or title. It is the embodiment of hope made manifest, a living testament to the truth that death is not the end, but the gateway to new beginnings, and that in the eternal struggle between light and shadow, renewal is always possible. The War of the Ring stands as the climactic conflict of the Third Age of Middle-earth, a monumental struggle that decided the fate of the world, pitting the overwhelming might of Sauron and his dark forces against the resolute, yet fragile alliance of the Free Peoples. Throughout this vast and brutal campaign, Gandalf the White was a central figure, embodying the resilience, wisdom, and leadership that galvanized the disparate races of Middle-earth to unite and resist the shadow of tyranny. His critical roles in the kingdoms of Rohan and Gondor, his strategic counsel, and his restrained yet powerful presence during the final push against Mordor's darkness highlight how indispensable he was in securing the ultimate victory. Beyond the battles themselves, Gandalf's greatest strength was perhaps his unwavering humility and wisdom, most notably shown in his refusal to claim the One Ring, recognizing the corrupting power it held even over the mightiest beings. As the War of the Ring unfolded, the forces of Sauron gathered in terrifying numbers. His armies, vast and relentless, sought to crush all resistance across Middle-earth and recover the One Ring, the very source of his power. From the Black Land of Mordor, dark legions marched forth. Orcs, trolls, Haradrim, Easterlings, and felled beasts, driven by malice and fear. Their advance was a tidal wave of destruction, sweeping across the lands, threatening to extinguish the last embers of hope. In the land of Rohan, the Horse Lords faced an existential crisis. Saruman, the fallen wizard who had turned traitor, sent forth his armies of orcs and wild men to seize the kingdom. The once proud King Theoden was ensnared by Saruman's dark influence through the machinations of the treacherous advisor Grima Wormtongue. Under this shadow, Theoden grew weak, despairing, and withdrawn, leaving his people vulnerable. It was Gandalf's intervention that shattered this darkness. Arriving at Edoras, Gandalf confronted Wormtongue and broke Saruman's hold over Theoden. His words rekindled the king's courage and spirit, restoring his will to lead his people in defense of their homeland. Theoden's transformation was swift and profound. He rose renewed, gathering the Rohirrim the horse, lords famed for their unmatched horsemanship and fierce loyalty, to march to war. Gandalf's counsel and presence at Edoras were pivotal. He not only restored the king's strength but also united the Rohirrim with the wider resistance. Recognizing the strategic importance of defending Gondor, Gandalf led the Rohirrim on a harrowing ride to the aid of Minas Tirith, Gondor's besieged capital. This cavalry charge would become legendary, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, where the Rohirrim's thunderous arrival turned the tide against Sauron's forces. Meanwhile, in Gondor, the situation was dire. The city of Minas Tirith faced an enormous siege by Sauron's armies. The city's walls shook under bombardment, and its defenders were stretched thin. Gandalf took up a central role in the defense of the city, rallying its people and coordinating the forces with calm authority. His presence bolstered morale, inspiring soldiers and civilians alike to stand firm despite overwhelming odds. Gandalf's leadership in Gondor extended beyond battlefield command. He served as the primary counselor to Denethor II, the steward of Gondor, whose despair and pride complicated the defense efforts. Gandalf worked tirelessly to counter Denethor's growing hopelessness and to support Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, whose arrival from the south was crucial. His guidance helped smooth the political tensions and prepare the city for the decisive moments to come. Throughout these conflicts, Gandalf's strategic vision was essential. He recognized that Sauron's strength was tied to the One Ring, and that the key to victory was its destruction. However, he understood the peril of wielding the ring. The temptation it posed was immense. Even the strongest wills could be corrupted. Gandalf himself, a Maia of great power, consciously refused to claim the ring, knowing that he would inevitably fall to its shadow and become a tyrant no better than Sauron. Instead, Gandalf entrusted this burden to Frodo Baggins, a humble hobbit whose innocence and resilience made him uniquely suited to bear the ring's terrible weight. Gandalf's restraint was an act of profound wisdom and humility. He recognized that true power did not come from domination but from service, sacrifice, and the courage to reject temptation. As Frodo and Sam made their perilous journey into Mordor, Gandalf coordinated the broader war effort to distract Sauron and give the ring-bearer the best chance of success. He supported Aragorn in rallying the armies of the West, uniting men of Gondor and Rohan, as well as allies from distant lands such as the Rangers of the North and the forces of the dead. This coalition was unprecedented, a testament to Gandalf's ability to inspire and unite disparate peoples in a common cause. One of Gandalf's most daring maneuvers was the march to the Black Gate of Mordor, led by Aragorn. This bold campaign served as a crucial diversion, drawing Sauron's attention away from Mount Doom, where Frodo and Sam faced their final, desperate task. Gandalf understood that victory required not just military might, but also cunning and sacrifice, using every advantage to fracture the enemy's focus. The climax of the War of the Ring came when the ring was destroyed in the fiery chasm of Mount Doom. The moment the ring was unmade, Sauron's power collapsed, and his armies were thrown into disarray. The great dark tower of Barad-dûr crumbled, and with it the shadow that had threatened to engulf the world. The victory was not the work of a single hero, but the result of countless sacrifices, alliances, and acts of bravery with Gandalf as a central architect. After the war, Gandalf helped oversee the restoration of peace and order. He supported Aragorn's coronation as King Elisar, marking the dawn of a new age of hope and renewal. Gandalf continued to guide the rebuilding of the kingdoms, advising leaders and helping heal the scars left by conflict. Throughout the War of the Ring, Gandalf exemplified the qualities of a true leader: wisdom tempered by patience, strength balanced with compassion, and power wielded with humility. His refusal to claim the ring underscored his deep understanding of the corrupting nature of absolute power and highlighted his commitment to serving the greater good rather than personal ambition. Gandalf's critical roles in Rohan and Gondor, his strategic insight during the siege of Minas Tirith, and his guidance during the final push against Mordor illustrate his indispensable presence in the conflict. Yet it was his restraint, his ability to inspire without dominating, and his unwavering faith in the resilience of others that made him the linchpin of the Free People's success. The War of the Ring was not simply a battle for land or power, it was a profound struggle between freedom and tyranny, hope, and despair. Gandalf's leadership embodied the best of Middle-earth's virtues, a beacon shining through the darkness, reminding all that even the smallest acts of courage could change the fate of the world. His legacy from this war is immense, a legacy of unity forged through hardship, of sacrifice made for the future, and of the enduring power of wisdom over brute force. The final victory was not just the defeat of Sauron, but the triumph of those virtues. Gandalf embodied virtues that continue to inspire long after the echoes of war have faded. Through every battle, every council, and every moment of doubt, Gandalf the White stood as a steadfast guardian of hope. His story in the War of the Ring is a testament to the profound impact one individual can have when guided by wisdom, humility, and a commitment to the greater good qualities that ultimately secured the freedom of Middle-earth and shaped its destiny for ages to come. The end of the Third Age of Middle-earth marked a monumental shift in the history of this richly woven world, a turning point where the age of myth, magic, and legendary heroes drew to a close, and the dominion of men was set to begin. At the heart of this transition was Gandalf the White, the Maia who had walked among elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits, guiding, protecting, and inspiring those who stood against the dark tide of Sauron. His departure from Middle-earth, alongside the other ring-bearers, was both a moment of victory and profound sorrow, a bittersweet farewell that signified the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter in the world's unfolding story. The War of the Ring had ended with the destruction of the One Ring and the fall of Sauron, bringing an unprecedented peace to Middle-earth. Yet the scars left behind by the conflict ran deep. Cities lay in ruins, fields were scorched, and countless lives had been lost. The peoples of Middle-earth faced the daunting task of rebuilding not only their homes and kingdoms, but also their spirits. The end of the war was not merely a cessation of hostilities, it was the beginning of healing, restoration, and the search for lasting peace. For Gandalf, this peace came with a sense of closure. As one of the Istari emissaries sent by the Valar to aid Middle-earth, his mission was never to rule or dominate, but to guide, encourage, and protect. His time in Middle-earth was always meant to be finite, a chapter in the larger history of Arda. Now, with his purpose fulfilled and the darkness vanquished, the time had come for him to return to the Undying Lands, the blessed realm of Aman beyond the western seas, where the immortal Valar and the elves dwelt in eternal peace. This decision was not made lightly. Gandalf's attachment to Middle-earth, forged through centuries of struggle, friendship, and sacrifice, was profound. He had grown to love the lands and peoples he served, from the humble Shire to the great kingdoms of men and elves. Leaving was a sorrowful but necessary step, one that acknowledged both the natural order of things and the changing tides of time. Joining Gandalf on this final journey were the ring-bearers Frodo Baggins, the hobbit who bore the unimaginable burden of the One Ring, Bilbo Baggins, whose chance discovery of the ring had set many of these events into motion, and the elves, including Galadriel and Elrond, whose time in Middle-earth was drawing to a close as the age of the elves waned. Together, they formed a small, poignant company bound by their shared experiences of loss, courage, and hope. Their voyage to the Grey Havens was a solemn procession. The Grey Havens, or Mythland, lay on the western shores of Middle-earth, a place of ships and departure where the sea met the sky in an endless horizon. Here, those who sought the peace of Aman embarked on their final passage, leaving behind the mortal lands and the cares of the world. The gathering at the Grey Havens was filled with a mixture of emotions. For the peoples of Middle-earth who remained, it was a moment of reverence, gratitude, and sorrow. They watched as their greatest heroes, guides, and friends prepared to sail away, understanding that with their departure came the close of the Third Age and the fading of an age of wonders. The elves' song filled the air, carrying both a lament for what was lost and a celebration of what had been saved. As the ship set sail, their white sails catching the light of the setting sun, a profound silence settled over the onlookers. The vessels passed beyond the sight of those who remained, slipping into the mist, and the unknown. This departure was not merely a physical journey but a symbolic one, a passage from the world of change and decay into a timeless realm of healing and rest. For Gandalf, this voyage marked the return to his true home, the Undying Lands where the Valar held sway and where his Maia spirit was originally bound. It was a place beyond sorrow and suffering, where time held no dominion and peace was eternal. Yet, despite this return to the immortal realm, Gandalf's influence would continue to resonate throughout Middle-earth, woven into the very fabric of its history and the hearts of its peoples. The departure of Gandalf and the Ring-Bearers also symbolized the passing of the age of magic and legend. The elves, whose power and presence had shaped much of Middle-earth's history, were dwindling and preparing to leave. The Istari's work was complete, and the world was transitioning into the dominion of men, where myth would become memory and legend would fade into story. This transformation was bittersweet. On one hand, it meant that Middle-earth was freed from the shadow of the Dark Lord, entering a time of peace and prosperity. On the other, it meant the loss of the magical, the mystical, and the timeless forces that had long shaped the land. The world was changing, growing older and more mortal, but carrying within it the legacy of all who had come before. The hobbits who remained in the Shire would remember the tales of Gandalf and the great quest for generations to come, telling stories around hearth fires that spoke of courage, friendship, and sacrifice. The kingdoms of men would rise anew, guided by the wisdom and example set by leaders who had stood with Gandalf in the darkest hours. And though the elves and Istari had sailed away, their gifts of knowledge, beauty, and hope would linger in the hearts of those left behind. Gandalf's departure closed the chapter on an age filled with heroism and sorrow, light and shadow. It was a farewell that underscored the impermanence of even the greatest of beings and deeds. Yet it was also a testament to the enduring power of hope, love, and sacrifice. His journey from Olórin, the Maia spirit in the timeless halls, to Gandalf the Grey and then Gandalf the White, and finally back to the Undying Lands, was a circle of purpose and grace, marked by his unwavering commitment to protect and guide. The world he left was free, yet changed forever. The darkness had been defeated, but the cost had been great. The Third Age ended not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a quiet understanding that all things must pass. The Fourth Age was the Age of Men, an age that would build upon the foundations laid by those who had sacrificed so much. In the final moments at the Grey Havens, the companions stood together, Frodo, still bearing the invisible scars of his burden, Bilbo, older and wiser, the elves, radiant and mournful, and Gandalf, the guide and guardian who had shepherded them through shadows and light. Their departure was a moment of peace after great turmoil, a passage to healing and rest beyond the seas. As the ships sailed westward, fading into the mist and horizon, they carried with them the hopes and dreams of a world reborn. Gandalf's story became legend, a beacon of light in the darkness, a symbol of courage and wisdom that would inspire generations to come. Though he left Middle-earth behind, Gandalf's spirit remained intertwined with its fate, a reminder that even in departure, the bonds forged through sacrifice and friendship endure. His legacy was not merely in the battles fought or the wars won, but in the hearts of all who chose hope over despair, courage over fear, and love over hatred. The departure from Middle-earth was not just an ending. It was a promise that the light would always return, that even in parting there is hope, and that the stories of heroes, both great and small, would live on forever in the songs, the memories, and the hearts of those who remember.